Ladies and gentlemen, I am very privileged today to be able to join you in this event to demand for priority for Singaporeans for Singapore jobs. And I echo the sentiments of Mr. Lim Tean, who said earlier that we must not be the silent crowd. We are all here today because we recognize that there is a problem in our economy, that Singaporeans are not given priority in jobs, and that has caused great hardship. And it is up to us as a citizen of Singapore to advocate for change and to call on the government to give the Singaporean that priority. Now, it is very clear to me that since 2004, when the PAP government opened the floodgates to irrational immigration and the influx of foreign labor, the situation of the Singapore worker has deteriorated immeasurably. That Singapore worker now, today, is in constant trepidation of losing his job to a cheaper foreign worker. And this government gives him no assurance or no protection. In 2015, 98% of total employment went to foreign workers. Only about 700 jobs, less than 2% of the total, were jobs for the Singaporean worker. Now, when that Singaporean worker loses the job, what our ministers don't see is the despair in the face of that Singaporean worker, knowing that he will not be able to provide the same standard of living for his family anymore, wondering how he's going to pay his bills, his mortgage, which comes mainly from the CPF in Singapore, as we know. We are the only advanced country in the world where there is no government protection at all for the Singaporean worker. And the PAP ministers tell us, don't adopt a populist approach. Don't be like the Trump. Don't be like Brexit. At the end of the day, this is not xenophobia. This is not even populism. It comes back to a word which all of us can understand. It is called community. We are the Singapore community. In the 80s, you know, the PAP government went on this nation-building program. They crafted beautiful songs, One Singapore, which were played at National Day parades. Every Singapore man, 18 and above, has to bear arms for his country. And this past week, the Court of Appeal in Singapore handed down the judgment, where it sent 3 defaulters of NS to prison. And the judges said, you have to be proud and loyal to your country. Now, can that Singapore worker not demand a certain loyalty from his government? I remember in the 80s and 90s, the PAP and Lee Kuan Yew were pulling out all these Confucianist scholars to explain how their system of government, based on a Confucianist system, was much superior to that of the Western system. I am no Confucianist scholar, but I know sufficient to know that Confucius taught that the 3 most important things for government was first, sufficiency of arms, which means the government has to be able to protect the nation. And secondly, sufficiency of food. And third was faith of the people in the government. Now, when you allow that foreign worker to take away that Singapore job, how do you expect that Singaporean worker to put food on the table? And is that not taking away food? Is that not supplying inadequate food for his family? But it is unfortunate that we have ministers whose attitude is that we cannot give priority to that Singaporean for that Singapore job. And it is typified by people, by ministers like Amy Khor in 2015 during the general elections. And I believe she was a senior Minister of State for Manpower at that time. And she said, no, we can't give priority to that Singaporean because it may cause dislocation in our economy. I am paraphrasing her. She was saying that companies may leave because they were restricted in their employment policies. That Singaporean worker was taught in his formative years that education was his pathway to a better life. And he wonders now why, in the prime of his life, as an educated person in one of the most educated countries in the world, he has become an outcast in his workforce. I do not think that any government that really cares about its people will allow this to happen. And I repeat again, there is no advanced country in the world that has such a lax policy towards immigration and towards the protection of jobs for its citizens. Less than 2 weeks ago, the Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull said when Australia tightened its 457 visa policies, it is Australian jobs first, foremost for Australians. So, ladies and gentlemen, Americans first is not just about Trump. It is a sentiment that is going around the world today. It is going around in Australia. It is reappearing in New Zealand, which gave us the first minimum wage laws in the late 1800s. It is everywhere. I cannot think of a single advanced country in the world that has the policies or non-policies which Singapore has. I now want to come to another topic, which Mr. Tan touched upon earlier, and that is of minimum wage. Now, without a minimum wage, there cannot be a level playing field for our lower income workers. Never. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, from time immemorial, there have always been arguments against the minimum wage. And these are the same arguments whether they appeared in the late 1800s or in the 1900s or now in this century. It is that businesses can't afford it. You will drive businesses away. And the end result is that these lower income workers will suffer even more because they don't have jobs. I can tell you all these arguments are hogwash. Hogwash. New Zealand introduced the minimum wage in the late 1800s. I think it was 1896 or thereabouts. In 1938, Franklin Delano Roosevelt introduced the minimum wage in America. He had lifted himself out of his wheelchair to lift America from its knees of the Great Depression in 1933. 1929 to 1933, the Depression years. In 1938, they found themselves back in a recession. But he had the courage to tell Americans, I am going to introduce a basic minimum wage of 25 cents. 25 cents in those days. And you know what he told his opponents? Who gave the same arguments that the PAP gives us today about not imposing a minimum wage. He told them, don't let those calamity howling executives with an income of $1,000 a day tell you that paying a wage of $11 a week will destroy American industry. And he went on to say, no business that cannot afford to pay a living wage to its workers should continue in existence in this country. I was looking at some statistics the other day. You know how much a senior minister of state in Singapore, who also happens to be a mayor, earns in a year? Let me give you the figures. $770,000 a year as a minister of state. $660,000 a year as a mayor. $192,500 a year as a member of parliament. Makes a grand total of $1,622,500, which averages out to $135,208.33. I can be that precise. And that even without bonuses and perks. So I'm telling Singaporeans, you don't allow those ministers who earn at least $3,000 to $4,000 a day tell you that they cannot afford to pay Singaporeans at least $1,200, $1,300, or even $1,500 a day, a month. Today, 15% of our population have a household income of $1,000 or less, below the poverty line. So we want to be a first world nation. But we accommodate this poverty. And the PAP government will not allow a minimum wage. It comes with all other ideas. It has workfare, Comcare, job fairs. It has all the fares in the world except to give that Singaporean worker a fair wage and a fair job. So that Singaporean low-income worker is forever tied to the apron strings of the government. He has no dignity. He cannot make it on his own. What we should be doing is to advocate for a minimum wage so that everyone has a living wage. So that people have more money to go into shops, to buy things which will lift our economy. Not have them dependent. So in conclusion, I say, just like Franklin Roosevelt did 70, 80 years ago when he gave America the New Deal. Today, we need a New Deal for our workers. Give our workers priority for Singapore jobs and give every Singaporean that minimum wage. Thank you very much. Thank you.